Alright, welcome back, guys. So in this video we're now going to go over the next type of subconscious thought, or the next mode of subconscious thought expression, and that's going to be transcendental perception. So to understand what that is, basically in a nutshell, your subconscious, right? We said before that when your subconscious compels your conscious mind, it has the ability to affect the choice. It makes his conscious mind feel an urge to make a certain decision. So it affects its free will in a way, even though it's still intact. It also incorporated into that compulsion is also an emotion. So it can compel you to feel an emotion as well. It also can compel you to control your body in a certain way. So that's transcendental control. And then with this next one, when you feel compulsion, embedded in that compulsion is the subconscious ability to alter your perception. So in other words, the subconscious has the ability to alter the way the conscious mind perceives reality, which is what I put here. Now, just to make a little bit of a distinction, right here I put conscious mind instead of negative mind. Now, I've been using the terms interchangeably, but there is a slight difference in what I mean when I say conscious mind and negative mind. I kind of forgot to mention that. I know what the difference is, but I forget to mention it out loud. There is a slight difference between the two, which we'll talk more about, I think in chapter 5. Yeah, so chapter 5 will cover that. But in this context, it makes a little more sense to just say conscious mind. So I just want to get that out the way, but it's not that important right now, and I can still use it for now, interchangeably with the negative mind, but I just wanted to say that. But anyway, like I was saying, the subconscious has the ability to alter the way the conscious mind perceives reality. And that occurs on every level or every layer of perception. So anything the conscious mind is capable of being aware of, the subconscious can alter the way the conscious mind perceives it. So in the book, we're going to talk about 3 different levels or layers of perception where it occurs. The first one we're going to talk about is with the 5 senses. So even the body's ability to receive information from the external environment, transmit that information to your brain, and then your brain transfers that information to your consciousness. That's how I see the process, right? Even then, even receiving the sensory information from your brain in your body, the subconscious can even alter the way your conscious mind or your awareness perceives that information. So the way I like to think of it is like, it's kind of like a camera, right? So when you take a picture, or use a camera to take a picture, some parts of the picture are going to be in the foreground. So they're going to be more in focus, they're going to be sharper, easier to see, and they're going to be, they're going to be more zoomed in, right? And then everything in the background is going to be less sharp. I'm forgetting the word for it. So it's going to be less sharp, more zoomed out, more out of focus. Right? So that's kind of what your subconscious has the ability to do with your conscious mind. So it can make certain things that you're aware of, it can make so many things easier to become aware of, more in focus to your conscious mind, easier to focus on. And it's going to make certain things that you're aware of be more out of focus and harder to be aware of. They're going to be less pronounced to you. Right? And so, again, we're going to talk about those examples with the 5 senses. Now, one thing I want to say, actually, before I even go over that, as with any transcendental ability, transcendental perception can be charged, right? So the more you charge transcendental perception, the more that the altering component of it becomes, the more pronounced it becomes, right? Or the altering effect. So that just basically means the more zoomed in certain things will seem, and the more zoomed out other things will be, the harder they're going to be to notice. So that's basically what happens when it charges. As far as a quantization effect, transcendental perception also has a frequency component to it. The frequency component isn't too important when it comes to the 5 senses. We're going to talk more about the frequency component in the next sections, in the next videos. But it's not really that important when it comes to the 5 senses, in my opinion. So just to go over some examples, when I was a kid, right, I'll just go into another story, right? When I was a kid, I would always hear people talk about how they would see like a man's face on the moon, right? And I could never see that. I never knew what they were talking about. Had no idea. I didn't see anything, right? All I saw was a bunch of dark spots, right? And I know they don't mean it literally, right? They're saying they see the image, the outline of a man within the dark spots, and not like I know that, but I still don't see it, right? I still don't see any type of man. I don't know what y'all are talking about, right? That's how I always felt. So when I got a little bit older, for whatever reason, I was just like, you know what? I hear it so much, I'm gonna actually try to see the supposed man, right? And so I looked. I didn't look at the actual moon. I looked at a picture, and I kept trying to look at it and see the picture of a man, and then eventually I actually could see it for like the first time in my life. I actually saw a face of a man in the moon. I still don't think it looks that much like a man. Like till this day, I still don't really know what people are talking about, but I understand it a little bit more. And the reason that happened is because I ended up holding the intention to see a man's face in the moon. And when I held that intention, right, my subconscious responded to that intention, so it became quantized and what it did is it compelled my conscious mind, and it altered my perception to see a man's face on the moon. So what it did is it made certain dark spots on the moon harder to see, less pronounced, more zoomed out, and it made other parts of the moon more zoomed in, more pronounced, easier to see. And the outline of the more pronounced part of the image that I'm seeing looks like a man's face, right? And so that's why I could see it. And so basically the subconscious was responding to my intention and allowed me to see that. That was what ended up causing it to work. And this is a good example of what I was saying before in the first chapter. Notice I didn't really talk about the frequency component or refer to an emotion. It wasn't important in this case. And that's because when quantization is based on intention and frequency. Frequency will give you a good chunk of information about how the subconscious will become quantized or what it's going to do after quantization, but it won't give you all the information. Like in this example, to get the rest of the information, or the main part in this case, the main information came from intention, right? So intention is going to tell you what the rest of the subconscious is going to do. So that's why quantization is really based on intention and frequency. And the same, just as to give some other examples, the same effect happens when you see like an animal in the cloud. If someone says they see, I don't know, let's say they see a tiger in the cloud, right? You don't see anything. It's just like an irregular random shape. But if you hold the intention to see the tiger, after a little while, you'll be able to see it, right? And that's because of this ability. Your subconscious responded to your intention to see a tiger and then altered your perception to see it, right? And same thing with you when it comes to hearing, right? So if you hear a whole bunch of sounds in the room, right? But you want to hear like one quiet sound like in that room, if you hold the intention to hear that sound, you're going to notice you'll have a better ability to, right? Now, as far as I know, nothing changes in terms of the nerve signals, right? So your nerve signals are still transmitting just as much information to your brain. But for whatever reason, you do successfully have the ability to kind of tune out the louder sounds and hear that quiet sound. And that I believe, right? I haven't done research on the nervous system and the brain or whatever, but I believe that principle comes from this, the subconscious. So same thing happens when you're cooking and you want to taste a certain flavor, right? If you want to make sure the flavor isn't coming in too strong or too weak, you might eat it and hold the intention to focus on that flavor. And then your subconscious, once again, will kind of zoom in on that single flavor, so it'll be easier to notice it, and all the other flavors will just be harder to notice. So that's another example. This occurs on pretty much every level of perception, down to your five senses. It's not like conscious to the subconscious is pretty much all the same. Every level of perception, it still works the same. Now, an interesting case that we could probably all relate to is pain, right? So when you're in pain, right, you feel pretty bad, right? You want the pain to stop. So when you're in pain, you don't like it, you tend to focus on it, probably with the hopes of trying to figure out a way to stop it somehow. But you probably notice when you focus on that pain, it's like it hurts more now. And it's not like, it doesn't just seem that way. That's actually what's happening, right? Because when you hold the intention to focus on the pain, your subconscious takes that as a command that you're commanding it to focus on the pain, right? So what it does is it compels you and alters your perception, so that everything else, every other feeling that isn't painful is harder to notice, and everything that feels painful is easier to notice. So you feel it more, right? Just like you would feel an emotion more strongly when you focus on it. So, yeah, that same thing happens with pleasure, by the way. But that phenomenon that we've all experienced, which is annoying, actually comes from this. Now, I think I can say this on YouTube. So, sexual attraction, right, is the same principle. This one's a little bit different. We're going to talk more about this in the next chapter, but this one actually does have a frequency. So your subconscious, I mean, they all got frequencies, but this one is important to talk about. So your subconscious, when it switches to sexual frequency, right, what it does is it alters, you feel the sexual emotion, but it also alters your perception to perceive certain aspects of the opposite, or the sex you're attracted to, right? So, like when I was a kid, right, I used to see girls, women all the time, and never really thought much of it, right? Never really, thought of them the way I do now. And so when I hit puberty, though, right, that's when things changed. Like certain parts of a girl's body would just stand out to me. Wasn't trying to focus on them, wasn't trying to even, acknowledge them anyway, but there was nothing I could do. They would just immediately stand out to me, right? And it'd be specific parts. Every guy knows what I'm talking about, right? So it would be specific parts of her body. Or it's just like everything else is zoomed out, all the rest of the environment, there's only those parts that like I see, right? And that comes from this, right? So your body, your subconscious compels you to notice certain things on a girl's body, or the sex that you're attracted to. So that comes, again, we'll talk more about that in the next chapter, because there's more to say about that. But yeah, these are basically examples of transcendental perception. But like I said, it isn't that pronounced with the five senses, but it's still worth talking about. I'm trying to remember if there's anything I forgot to say. No, I think that's everything. So actually, no, there's one other thing I did want to talk about. This isn't too important, but I kind of want to bring it up now. You've probably noticed, and this happens in music, right? I'm going to talk about music. Something I've experienced in music too. But you've probably noticed certain artists you probably liked. A lot of times in music, right? When an artist first comes out, usually it's when they first come out and they're a little young, their music sounds pretty good. But then like a couple albums later, it sounds terrible, right? So their music is not nearly as good. And the artists will keep trying really hard to capture that magic again. So they keep trying to make good music again, and they just can't, right? Why does that happen? Part of the reason it happens is because of this phenomenon. So when you're making beats, right? When you're making music, you have to continuously loop it over and over and over and over again. That's just how, you make music. And when you keep looping it over, you tend to kind of become desensitized to it, and you lose perspective on it, right? It's very difficult for you to now perceive it the way someone perceives it when it's new, when it's fresh, And so, actually, that's a big phenomenon when it comes to the subconscious, which is almost what all of chapter 9 and 10 is about. But for now, we'll just gotta use everyday terms and say you get desensitized to it. And so, when artists do that, and they really want to make good music, what they end up doing is they continue. This is kind of if they don't know how to actually make good music. But what they end up doing when it keeps looping, they end up holding intention that says they want the music. They want to hear, when they hear the music, they want it to be good, right? That's just pretty much what the intention they're holding is saying, is for the music to sound good. Now the problem with doing that, and the song is looping over and over again, is that your subconscious sees that as a command. And it says, okay, if you want the music to sound good to you, I'm going to make it sound good to you, right? And so that it doesn't have to actually sound good because the subconscious doesn't care about any of that. It's just listening to whatever your command is. You could be banging trash cans, which is kind of how my first beats used to sound. But you could just be banging trash cans together. And if you hold the intention for that to sound good to you, then your subconscious will do that, right? Because that's what you commanded it to do. So when people are making music, and they keep holding the intention for it to sound, what they're doing to sound good, what ends up happening is their subconscious keeps charging, and it keeps charging to make their music sound good. And the more they loop it, and the longer they hold their intention, and the more the subconscious charges, the more altered their perception becomes. And so their music sounds even better, right? The bad parts of the music are harder to notice, are less pronounced, and the good parts of the music are easier to notice, are more pronounced. So that's kind of what they see, and that's what they're judging it by. And what they're expecting is that, what they don't realize is that other people who hear it for the first time, they're not going to have that subconscious charge, right? They're going to hear the whole beat in the proper perception, right? Nothing's going to be zoomed out or zoomed in, right? They're just going to hear it fully, right? And because they don't have the charge, they're going to kind of hear it in a more true way, right? Whereas a person making the beat who had that charge, they've lost perspective because their perception is so altered now, right? So they're not going to, their judgment is out of whack, right? They can't really use it anymore to judge the beat. So that's kind of why artists end up making bad music, because even though the music sounds good to them, right? And they kept working really hard trying to make it good. But the harder they worked and the longer they worked, the more altered their perception they became and the more unreliable it became. So it's like trying to make the song better for a longer period of time only ends up making it worse, right? They end up working against themselves. And so when they finally release the song, it sounds good to them, but and then when people hear it, it's terrible, right? And the proper way to do it, we're going to talk more about it later. There is a proper way to do it. That is the incorrect way, obviously, to constantly hold the intention to make the music sound good. That's not how these things work. We'll talk more about that, I think, toward the end of the chapter, because there is a way around it, and it does have to do with the subconscious. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's transcendental perception when it comes to the five senses. In the next video, we're going to talk about transcendental perception at the next level of perception, which has to do with your imagination and your mind, right? So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.